Nobody chooses average. Nobody sits down as a child and decides that they will live a life of quiet mediocrity, that they will work a job they tolerate, stay in relationships that don't grow them, and die with the majority of their potential completely untouched. And yet, statistically, overwhelmingly, that is exactly what most people do. Not because they are stupid, not because they are lazy, not because the universe dealt them a uniquely terrible hand, but because there are specific, documented, deeply understood psychological mechanisms that quietly and systematically pull human beings toward the middle, toward the safe, toward the familiar, and away from the kind of bold, uncomfortable, identity-threatening growth that extraordinary living actually requires. And today we are going to name every single one of those mechanisms, expose them completely, and give you the psychological tools to see them operating in your own life. Because you cannot escape a trap you cannot see, and most people spend their entire lives inside a trap they were never shown existed. Let's start at the very beginning, at the neurological level, because the pull toward average is not a character flaw and it is not a personal failure. It is, first and foremost, a feature of the human brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. Your brain's primary directive, the one that overrides almost every other function when push comes to shove, is not to make you happy, not to make you successful, not to make you fulfilled. It is to keep you alive. And in the evolutionary context in which your brain was built, staying alive meant staying close to what was known, what was familiar, what had already been proven safe. The brain achieves this through a mechanism called the homeostatic impulse, the same biological drive that regulates your body temperature, your hunger, your sleep cycles. And it applies this same drive to your psychological and behavioral life. Any significant deviation from your current normal triggers a threat response. Any move toward the unfamiliar, a new career, a difficult conversation, a bold creative project, a relationship that requires genuine vulnerability, registers in the brain's threat detection system with a similar neurological signature to physical danger. This means that the discomfort you feel when you try to grow is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that your brain is functioning perfectly and that you are going to have to consciously, deliberately, repeatedly override it if you want to live at a level above the one your nervous system has decided is safe. Most people never learn this. They feel the discomfort of growth and interpret it as a stop sign rather than a green light, and they retreat, not out of weakness, but out of a fundamental misunderstanding of what the discomfort is actually telling them. And that misunderstanding, compounded across thousands of moments, across decades of living, is the neurological architecture of an average life. Now, let's talk about the social dimension of staying average, because this is the layer that most psychology content never addresses with sufficient honesty, and it may be the most powerful force of all. Human beings are social animals in a way that goes far deeper than preference or personality. Belonging to the group was, for the vast majority of human evolutionary history, a literal survival requirement. Exclusion from the tribe meant death, and this means that the brain has developed extraordinarily powerful mechanisms for detecting social threat, for noticing when your behavior is deviating from group norms, when you are becoming too different, too ambitious, too visible, too successful in ways that separate you from the people around you. There is a phenomenon that researchers call tall poppy syndrome. The social tendency to cut down individuals who rise above the group norm, and it is documented across cultures, across continents, and across every social structure ever studied. And the brain anticipates this before it happens. It preemptively pulls you back toward average to avoid the social risk of standing out, the relational cost of being different, the loneliness of operating at a level your current community cannot follow you to. This is why so many people self-sabotage at the exact moment of breakthrough. Why they miss the deadline for the opportunity, why they start the argument that derails the relationship just as it was becoming something real, why they abandon the project at the point where it was about to become undeniable. The brain, at a level below conscious awareness, is protecting its social standing by preventing the very success that would separate it from the familiar tribe. And the only way to override this mechanism is to consciously, deliberately build a new tribe, to find and invest in relationships with people who are operating at the level you are trying to reach, because the brain's social calibration system works in both directions. And if the people closest to you are growing, ambitious, and excellent, the brain begins to experience growth as socially safe rather than socially threatening. Now, let's examine the role of identity in keeping people average, because this is perhaps the most underappreciated and most psychologically sophisticated mechanism in the entire architecture of mediocrity. Every person carries an internal self-concept, a deeply held, largely unconscious collection of beliefs about who they are, what they are capable of, what they deserve, and what is possible for someone like them. And this self-concept functions not just as a belief system, but as a behavioral governor, a psychological thermostat that automatically adjusts your actions, your choices, and your interpretations of reality to maintain consistency with the identity you hold about yourself. This means that if your self-concept includes the belief that you are someone who never quite finishes things, your brain will manufacture reasons to stop just before completion. If your self-concept includes the belief that success happens to other kinds of people but not to you, your brain will filter reality to find constant evidence for this belief while systematically ignoring evidence to the contrary. Psychologists call this cognitive confirmation bias, the brain's tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms its existing beliefs. And it is one of the most robustly documented phenomena in all of cognitive science. The average person is not failing to achieve because of a lack of opportunity or a lack of information. They are failing to achieve because their identity is set to average. And the brain is extraordinarily competent at producing the reality that matches its self-concept. This is why the most important work any person can do is not skill development, not networking, not strategy. It is identity-level work. It is the slow, uncomfortable, deeply personal process of examining what you believe about yourself and honestly asking whether those beliefs are facts or inherited fictions, whether they are accurate reflections of your potential or old stories that someone else wrote about you that you have been unconsciously performing ever since. Now, let's talk about comfort. Because comfort is the most seductive enemy of growth that has ever existed. And understanding its psychology is essential to understanding why most people stay exactly where they are. Comfort is not inherently evil. Rest is necessary. Safety has genuine value. But there is a specific psychological state that researcher Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow helps us understand the state in which your current challenges are perfectly matched to your current capabilities, and it is this state, not comfort, that produces the deepest human satisfaction, the strongest sense of aliveness, and the most durable sense of meaning. Comfort, by contrast, is the state in which your challenges are significantly below your capabilities, where you are operating in permanent cruise control, where nothing is required of you that you haven't already mastered, where every day is essentially a repetition of the previous day with minor surface variation, and the brain, which is a remarkably adaptive organ, begins in this state to quietly atrophy, not physically, but in terms of the neural pathways that produce creative thinking, strategic problem solving, emotional courage, and the capacity to tolerate uncertainty that all meaningful growth requires. The person who has lived in comfort for too long loses gradually and invisibly the psychological muscles needed to do the things that would change their life, not because they became less intelligent, but because the brain, like every other biological system, develops in response to demand. No demand, no development. Permanent comfort, in other words, is not rest. It is slow, cognitive, and psychological decline dressed in the clothes of safety. And the particularly insidious thing about comfort is that it feels like happiness from the inside, which is why most people don't recognize that they are shrinking until they have shrunk so much that the gap between who they are and who they could have been becomes too large and too painful to examine honestly. Now, let's look at the role of fear, and specifically, the fear that most people never name, which is not the fear of failure, but the fear of success. This sounds paradoxical until you understand the psychology beneath it. Failure is familiar. Most people have experienced failure many times, have developed coping mechanisms for it, know how it feels, and how to survive it. Failure is painful but navigable. Success, particularly the kind of dramatic, life-changing success that requires becoming a genuinely different person, is genuinely unknown territory. And the unknown, as we have already established, triggers the brain's threat detection system regardless of whether the unknown is dangerous or wonderful. Beyond the neurological novelty threat, success carries a specific set of social and psychological risks that the average person's brain anticipates and preemptively retreats from. The risk of increased expectations, which means that future failures will be more visible and more consequential. The risk of changed relationships, which means that the people who love you now might not recognize or relate to the person you are becoming. The risk of increased responsibility, which means that success is not just a reward, but a weight that not everyone is psychologically prepared to carry. And the risk of discovering that success doesn't feel the way you imagined it would, that you achieve the goal and find that the void is still there, which is perhaps the most terrifying possibility of all because it removes the future as a source of hope. These are not irrational fears. They are psychologically sophisticated responses to genuine uncertainties, but they become catastrophically limiting when they are never examined, never named, and never worked through. When they operate as invisible governors below the level of conscious awareness, steering every decision away from the actions that would produce a different life. Let's now address the role of language and narrative in maintaining average, because the stories we tell about our lives are not just descriptions of our reality, they are instructions to our nervous system about what kind of reality to keep producing. Most average lives are narrated in the passive voice. Things happen to the person rather than being chosen, created, or built by them. I never got the opportunity. Nobody ever showed me how. Things just didn't work out. That's just how it is for people like me. These narratives are not just psychologically disempowering, they are neurologically self reinforcing because every time you tell the story of your life as something that happened to you rather than something you participated in creating, you strengthen the neural pathway of external locus of control and weaken the neural pathway of personal agency, making it progressively harder to experience yourself as someone capable of making different choices that produce different outcomes. The high performers, the people who consistently escape average, tell their stories differently. Not more positively, not more optimistically, but more actively. They are the protagonist of their own narrative. Even in the chapters where they lost, even in the chapters where circumstances were genuinely brutal and unfair. And this narrative agency is not just a motivational posture. It is a cognitive tool that literally changes the kinds of solutions the brain generates, the kinds of opportunities the perceptual system notices, and the kinds of actions the behavioral system is willing to initiate. Now let's talk about the role of environment, because no conversation about why most people stay average is complete without an honest examination of how profoundly the physical, social, and informational environment shapes cognitive possibility. The research of behavioral economist Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on choice architecture, demonstrates conclusively that the way options are presented and the environment in which decisions are made has a larger influence on human behavior than the intentions, values, or preferences of the decision maker. In plain language, your environment is making most of your decisions for you. And if your environment is calibrated for average, if you are surrounded by average conversations, average ambitions, average media consumption, average models of what a human life can look like, your behavior will trend toward average regardless of what you consciously intend. This is not a comfortable truth. It implies that the solution to staying average is not just internal mindset work, it is the deliberate, sometimes painful redesign of your entire environment. The books on your shelf, the podcasts in your ears, the people at your dinner table, the social media accounts you absorb for 3 hours a day, the physical spaces you inhabit, the conversations you participate in versus the ones you choose to leave. Every element of your environment is either pulling you toward your potential or away from it. And the person who takes conscious control of that environment, who designs it as deliberately as an architect designs a building, is operating with an advantage so significant that it compounds in ways that make the internal willpower-only approach look primitive by comparison. And this brings us to the final and most important psychological truth about why most people stay average. And it is a truth that is simultaneously the most obvious and the most consistently overlooked insight in all of personal development psychology. Most people stay average, not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack opportunity, not because the system is rigged against them, and not even because their psychology is uniquely broken, but because the daily cost of becoming extraordinary is paid in a currency that the human brain is specifically wired to resist, which is the currency of sustained, voluntary, uncomfortable effort in the direction of growth with no guaranteed return and no immediate reward. Every single day, The person who is moving toward an extraordinary life is doing something that their brain is resisting, that their comfort is arguing against, that their social environment is not fully supporting, and that their identity is not yet fully aligned with. And they are doing it anyway, not because it feels good, not because it is easy, not because they are certain it will work, but because they have developed the psychological clarity to understand that the daily discomfort of growth is always, without a single exception in the entire history of human achievement, smaller than the lifetime discomfort of regret. And regret, as research by psychologist Thomas Gilovich at Cornell University consistently shows, is not felt most acutely for the things we tried and failed at. It is felt most acutely, most persistently, and most painfully for the things we never tried at all. For the version of ourselves we glimpsed and then walked away from. For the potential we were given and chose. Through 1,000 small, daily acts of comfortable retreat to leave entirely unexplored. You are watching this video because something in you already knows that average is not your destination. Something in you already senses the distance between where you are and where you are capable of going. And that sense, that uncomfortable, persistent, quietly burning awareness that more is possible, is not a source of suffering to be quieted. It is the most important signal your psychology will ever send you. It is the voice of your potential asking one more time whether today is finally the day you decide to listen. Subscribe for more mind secrets.